I don't know how to say exactly what it is, but I know that it's really important. I think that when I first started allowing myself to talk about my work in a vulnerable way, to be vulnerable, to say, I have this experience, the types of conversations that I could have with people became so much deeper.
I would introduce you as a photographer, if that's right. I think you also write. And then what I realized sort of belatedly is one of the things that's really interesting about your photographs is that you're the subject of most of them or many of them. So it's this kind of this double exposure, like you're exposing yourself through your work and also with yourself as a subject. So I was wondering if you could just talk a little bit more about the kinds of photographs you take and why.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for having me here. Recently, I was talking with my neurologist, who I really respect and admire for a multitude of reasons, one of which is he has a background in art. He studied studio arts and did a pre-med track when he was in college. And it's always fascinating to be in his office and see those degrees side by side. And one thing we talk about from time to time is representation in art. And friends of his who are artists who are still practicing. And that's his way of connecting with me beyond sort of symptoms and reading MRIs and things. And in our last appointment, I was talking about my photographs, and he said something. He asked me what it was about the infusion treatments that I receive that's compelling to me. Is it the IV that I want to show? Why is that interesting? And it was a very clear, direct question of what's so interesting about this. And I said to him more or less that it's a few things, three things. It's the ritual. It's the ritual of getting checked in to the infusion suite, because many of the portraits recently, within a number of years, I'm showing images of myself receiving treatment. And the ritual of arriving, having vitals taken, having this device inserted, and then just waiting. It's really like the hurry up and wait. So I said the ritual of going every 28 days, it's something that has to happen. But it's also, for me, in making the picture, I feel powerful. In the moment of setting up the camera and doing all of the preparation to make the picture, I feel very vulnerable, and it's physically challenging and sometimes painful to the extent that, the IV is often in my hand and I'm using my hands a lot and lifting. And I recently started using a camera where I didn't sit down for the whole 2 hours that I was there. And that was very exhausting. But even in that vulnerability and state of weakness, it feels really powerful to say, this is how I'm spending my time here. And then to have this thing that I've made, which I can't see myself in that patient perspective when I am the patient. But when I make that picture, it's a testament to, I'm not just this vulnerable person receiving treatment. I have the power to, I just feel powerful. So I told my neurologist that, and maybe I wasn't as assertive because I was really nervous, but it just really feels like a way of owning the experience.
So there's a couple of things around that, because one is what you're explaining makes me realize, or maybe understand better, the expressions on your face, because I can't place that emotion. Like when I look at your face, my first thought is, oh no, she looks, sad or in pain or whatever. But I think I'm just assuming that because of the setup, because when I really look at your face, it's not that. So there's something about that interplay of vulnerability and strength, I think, is actually showing in the expression on your face that I find really interesting.
I appreciate you saying that. I think that for any given session, there's probably anywhere from 1 to 200 pictures that are made. And when I'm actually choosing the one that I want to, for the time being, share, there's a lot of self-critical analysis of what a face looks like, what the emotion that I think should be conveyed is. I think about the experience we all have, or most people have, of going to the dentist, where, you're really at the mercy of what this sort of expert professional is doing. And you never see what you look like. Not really. It's a little different now that we all have a phone with a camera on it, because it's like interesting to take a selfie and see what you look like. But you would never really choose your expression. And something I'm interested in trying to accomplish is making a portrait with the nurse at the moment that the IV line is started, because I know for myself, I often sort of am pinching my arm or my leg, and I have no control of what's happening to my face because I'm just waiting for it to be over. Because whether it's part of the impact of the facial expression, I think there's a combination of pain, power, fear, and that's informed probably also not just by the facial expression, but also by the environment and however a person responds to the description of a hospital room. I have a friend who I just showed all of this work to. When I say all of this work, about 5 years of these hospital portraits too. And she said something to me like it was really hard for her to look at those images and see anything other than terminal cancer treatment and this memory of her mother dying. And so I think that the aesthetics of those rooms carry a lot on an individual interpretation, like on an individual level of what the meaning is. So in some ways, I don't think it even matters what the expression on my face is in terms of what's communicated for people once the picture's out there.
Okay, it's interesting because I don't have really personal or close family or friends experience with illness as serious as that. And when I was little, I used to spend a lot of time in hospitals just because my dad worked there. And on Saturday mornings, we would go and sit with patients and watch cartoons. So I don't have that. I don't have a negative response to the environment. So maybe that's why I looked more at you, just because I'm so familiar. I actually don't, probably very strangely, I don't associate that environment with negative things. So,
and I appreciate that, because it's not only negative, it can be a place where, there's a promise of ongoing life.
Yeah.
I mean, it can also be a place of torture.
Yeah.
It can be so many things based on an individual's experience. I really like that you just shared that experience, because I think it's really important.
Well, I would want you to see that place as a place of hope for you as well. And that's what's complex about what you're doing. And when you talked earlier about representation, what is it around what you're representing in those photographs that's important to you?
Well, the reason why I think I started making these portraits, after I got sick, I was really curious to find photographic projects or artists making work about chronic illness in a a style of memoir. And what I found in photography, I did a lot of individual research. I talked to people who specialize in selling books, photography books of all kinds, catalogs, art books, photo books. And I asked questions about projects like the ones I was looking for, you know, and no one really knew what I was talking about. No one really had examples to share. And I became more and more frustrated because I realized that what I wanted to see wasn't accessible, and there's no way that I'm the only person who wants to see it. And this was all before COVID. And I say that to mean that this was in a time where chronic illness was very alive and well, which might not be the right turn of phrase, but really existing. Now it is existing on a much more heightened and experienced and acknowledgeable level. But I just knew that I wasn't the only person looking for these things. And so I had this sort of drawn out experience of realizing that if I wanted to see this work, I really needed to be pursuing it and making it. And when I started turning the camera on myself, I wasn't really doing it where I was using a tripod and cable release and all the tools that I'm using now. I was really just sort of taking the camera and looking at my hand and looking at the IV line, or just sort of looking at it from the perspective of my height. But when I started turning the camera and looking at myself in this more formal portrait engagement with the camera way, it just sort of clicked, where I realized that there was a lot to explore and that there is a lot of power in the gaze. Just as a viewer of photographs and what you're talking about, the expressions on the face, there's a lot of power in reading that and spending time with that kind of exchange with an image. And I'm getting to a place now where I want to sort of find a method of exploration that moves beyond that very sort of direct engagement to something that is much more, I hate the word abstract because all photographs are abstractions of experience, but more of a metaphor, more of sort of a branching out, but I'm just not there yet.
But it's something to explore, something that you're attracted to exploring.
Yeah, I think the way I started exploring was really in the sort of peripheral, metaphorical way. And then I got very directed and, it's kind of like there's a whole recipe, but with a recipe, I think there's plenty of room for surprise and improvisation, but you also have to move beyond the recipe to find how things meander.
How does it feel to be doing that? Because that's exciting, to be exploring beyond your recipes. It can also maybe be a little bit intimidating because you don't know yet what you don't know and what you will learn. And so figuring out different ways of approaching this, how does that feel?
Exciting.
Good.
Really exciting. I think that something that got my blood moving about it was in December. I had a conversation with my mentor, who always talks about how photographers are pushed into this position to talk about the meaning of their work in a way that painters and musicians and really fill in the blank with any maker of any kind are not asked to, because people making photographs have this extraordinary gift to make things that really are representations of reality, very clear sort of reflections of reality. And with that, an audience wants to know, what is this? And if it looks so much like reality, please give me a very clear script to understand this. And if you think about it like a painter, and think about a way of describing the work like a painter describes the work, it can really be so open-ended and about, it could be any subject matter. The definition of the work doesn't have to be linked to the subject matter. And that is really freeing and exciting. And I've been thinking about that when thinking about switching up the recipe.
Nice. Nice. That's just, it's triggering very, very vague memories for me of the Susan Sontag on photography, which I think is the first thing that I read that said, the photograph is not the thing. And when you start thinking about that, it's pretty eye-opening because we do take it as evidence of an actual reality that's out there. And even if I conceptually don't think there's a real reality out there, I still often will look at a photograph and think it's about the thing that I see in the photo without all those layers of whatever I'm putting on it, whatever you may or may not intend by it. So talk to me a little bit about your writing, because when we first talked, I know you express yourself visually and through writing. So talk to me a little bit about what you like to do through your writing.
So I'll answer that question just by talking about the writing that I'm doing in conjunction with the infusion portraits. So I'm working on a book project right now that is a hybrid form of image and text. And the text is a series of short pieces that describe the experience of being the patient in that exchange with the nurse who is administering the medication in the IV. I also write about how members of my family engage with the nursing staff, engage with my neurologist, who I mentioned before. I write about how my neurologist refers to the medical treatment that he's chosen. And oftentimes these are really short and sharp pieces of writing where I'm really focusing on the absurdity of how certain things are perceived as really normal, but each time they're said to me or I remember them, I'm reminded of how it's not normal at all. These are things that can't be conveyed in an image. You know, my neurologist years ago, when I started taking this medication that was really effective, I think I asked him how long I'd be on it because I wanted to know more or less how long I had to really be so reliant on being insured because of the expense of the medication and all of the maintenance that goes into receiving the medication to make sure I don't have other infections and this and that. And I just wanted to sort of gear myself up to understanding for how long I had to have a conventional job with conventional medical insurance. And he said to me, he just answered by using an analogy, which was something like, you know, it's working. And it's like if you have a good boyfriend, you're not just going to go and get yourself a new boyfriend. If you have a boyfriend you're really happy with, you're going to stay with that boyfriend. And I was just so shocked because there was so much assumption about me in that answer, which is fine. But I just couldn't help but think about, like, if I was someone else with like a totally different history and totally different, you know, if I wasn't sitting there with my cis male partner who's very clearly a man, like just all of the assumptions that go into being a patient and sort of being in this relationship with a doctor. So all of the writing right now, excuse me, is really sort of reflecting on all of these conversations and exchanges that cannot be captured photographically, but that are really integral to the experience of patienthood, to the experience that makes a person feel totally powerless. I just think that in wanting to have this sort of memoir about this experience, it would be a disservice to have it just be images, and it would be a disservice to have it just be text. I mean, I have this dream about writing a novel a novel length work, but I don't have the capacity nor the skills to do that at this time. So right now, I think using the image and the writing together is a really powerful method of approaching it.
I love that. I'm always interested in how you can use different media to communicate different parts of a message. I think I've mentioned this before on a podcast even, but way back when I read Scott McCloud, he's a cartoon artist. And so he analyzed all the different ways that words and images can support each other. And sometimes it's, the image says it all and the words kind of repeat in case you don't get it. Sometimes it's half the message is through the image and half of it's through the text, and you kind of put those together and you can understand the full meaning. And then there's more sophisticated relationships between image and text that just help us. They lead us to a richer understanding that neither medium alone would be able to convey. So yeah, I think that's super interesting.
I also think that that's a really important point, because I think particularly in certain areas of photography, there's this prevalent thought that photographic books shouldn't include any text or any writing, and that it weakens the work. But I remember reading and learning about comics and just what you're describing. And if you think about that relationship, it really presents it as integral rather than competing or less sophisticated. It's so nuanced, and it isn't easy. It isn't easy to do well, but it can be totally powerful and it can be inextricable.
Yeah, no, and also it just is true that some people are going to be able to access what's in the text easier than the visual part, and some people the visuals easier than the text. So it also helps accommodate for just different styles of interpreting what's happening. I just wanted to go back to something you said, because I thought it was really interesting. If I look at your photographs in the hospital, particularly, so the moments of infusion, it can be, like, for me anyway, a way of normalizing that experience, right? It is not common, and it's maybe people aren't that familiar with it, but by showing it through your work, you help normalize it so that it becomes part of everyday experience. But then the doctor used that analogy that's not trying to normalize that for you, but absolutely not helpful. Like, that is making so many assumptions about, like you said, about who you are. How much would you say what you're doing is about trying to there's more and more about disease and disability in the world, and that a lot of the disability comes from the people who are abled judging what other people are capable of. So trying to normalize everybody's everyday experience. Is that a part of what you are working on?
Yeah. It was a huge part of making it public in the beginning. So in the beginning of this work, it really started for me when I started receiving these infusions. I didn't know how to talk about it. I didn't know how to tell even the most beloved of my loved ones about being ill, receiving these treatments, the sort of jarring wake-up call that this is the rest of my life, and this sense that I might have lived a more free-spirited life, unattached to a conventional job, the need for insurance, that was all an illusion of another time, and that there were these other responsibilities I had, primarily to myself, to stay well and able presenting, I suppose. These were all of these things that I understood when I started receiving treatments, that this is taboo to talk about. However, even though we don't talk about it much at that time, we weren't. Even though we don't see it very much at that time, we didn't. So many people are impacted by that experience of needing care that they cannot access for financial reasons, receiving medication by a multitude of methods that we don't talk about. And I just thought maybe this is something that I can start talking about by showing an image of it and not giving any context, because I really lose my ability, or at that time was losing my ability to speak eloquently about any of it once I started talking. So I just started sharing the pictures of it. And I was doing this at that time only on Instagram. And I started using a hashtag that was SJW Infusion. And I was just doing it, and people would ask me about it, and I would write them and say, I'm just trying to normalize. I would use that word. I'm just trying to normalize that this happens, because it feels for me totally crazy and not normal. And so if I'm just sharing a picture of it with you, it starts to make it feel a little bit more normal. And there's this whole area of Instagram for any illness, cancer, MS, lupus. If you ever look at the hashtag lupus warrior or MS warrior or cancer warrior, there's so much, and it's normalizing. And I found myself just sort of dipping my toe into art making about it, normalizing it, coming out to my friends in my community, and then finding power in that.
It must be exhausting to go through it. I'm assuming it's tiring to go through the infusion process itself. And so for you to be pursuing, to be photographing yourself during that process, I think is like heroic. That's amazing. That's like art making can be tiring enough for the rest of us, and being ill can be tiring enough, but you're making art in those moments when you're especially vulnerable to feel, I mean, physically weak in the sense of just undergoing the infusion process. So it's amazing. It's really incredible.
Thank you. It makes it all feel a lot more digestible to know that I'm going in there and I'm doing this stuff, because it can be a really sad place, because there are no doors, there are no walls, so you hear about everyone else's case, and it is a cancer center. And especially during the height of COVID, there was a lot of death. And I don't think that location, what we started talking about at the beginning of this, is necessarily a place of death, but there is a lot of illness there. So it feels good to have a purpose in the layers of what I'm doing there, to just have all of these things and to sit down and do it. And a friend of mine who I met when I was in my late 20s, he was in his mid 70s. He talked about this thing that he identified as the big kick in someone's life. And for him, his big kick was that his father had committed suicide when he was 10. And the date of his father's suicide is my birthday, like the day of the month. And when I met him, we met at a bar, and I told him about my MS, and he told me about his father's suicide. And he said, the suicide was my big kick, and it changed the track of my whole life and the way I think about everything. He said, I think the story that you've just told about getting sick, how you found out you were sick, I think that was your big kick. And everybody has something that they're dealing with, but they keep it really hidden. In some ways, it's buried or hidden because it's a method of coping and surviving. But in other ways, it's because we don't create space to talk about these things. And I often feel caught in this net of wanting to engage with people and hear their stories, hear what they see as things that make them vulnerable, because those moments of connecting and hearing those things are how I think we get closer to each other and grow and feel less alone. And what I'm doing right now is exploring that in the work that I'm making with images and writing.
I appreciate so much you taking the time today, Sara. I really, really, really enjoyed my conversation. It was so interesting.
I hope that it all connected. It felt like there were a lot of moments where I just sort of felt the power of the soapbox.
No, not at all. You were bold and brave. That was great. I really enjoyed it.